So I woke up inside of a giant fish. That's what we're talking about today as we start a new sermon series on one of my favorite books. We're starting Jonah, and the subtag for it is When God Loves Your Enemy. I love the book of Jonah, but I've gone through a journey through the book, I think much like you and I have, because when we think about Jonah, what do we think about, right? Like, what's the story about? If you had to just tell your kids right now, what is the story of Jonah about? You'd probably go, well, it involves Jonah, a prophet, and then he doesn't do what God wants him to do, and he's swallowed by a fish, and he gets spit out, and he preaches to Nineveh, right? Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the story, but it's missing a lot of the details. And also, that's only 2 chapters. Jonah and the whale is only in the first chapter. And that's just a few verses. There's so much more going on in this book than what we see at the very beginning. And I love it because Jonah is something that we don't expect it to be. You start reading Jonah and it says, "And the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai." That's the first verse of the book. And we read that and we're like, oh, this is just like Amos. This is just like Isaiah. It's like, and the word of the Lord came to Isaiah, son of Mike, or whatever it says there, right? Word of the Lord came to Amos, son of, Chris or something. I don't know. But we see all these oh, this is a typical prophet, but that's not what's going on with Jonah. You see, Jonah is written very differently than the other prophets that we see. It's written in almost like a satire form. It's written in a almost like a comic book. Everything is big and weird. It's almost written like Saturday Night Live.
I got a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell.
And what we end up seeing is that Jonah does something completely different than every other prophet does. So let's get into it. Let's get you in on the joke on what's going on in Jonah. So the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Now, right here, you should be laughing. But I have a sense that you're not. That's not funny, Jonah, son of Amittai. That's what's going on there. Well, if you spoke Hebrew, you would get into the joke a little bit more. So you have Jonah. Jonah actually means dove in Hebrew, dove. And then Amittai is father, son of Amittai. Amittai means faithfulness in Hebrew. So when you read it, it reads, the word of the Lord came to dove, son of faithfulness. And that's funny, but even more funny is, what does dove mean? We know what dove means. Do you release doves at the beginning of a huge battle out onto the battlefield? It's looking all up and no, you release it at weddings and things that are nice, right? Dove means peace. So now we can read it the way the Hebrews would read it, and we can see that we're starting to get in on the joke. The word of the Lord came to peace, son of faithfulness. And the reason why it's so funny is that Jonah isn't very peaceful, nor is he very faithful. So let's get into the story a little bit right up here on top. So the word of the Lord comes to that peace, son of faithfulness, dove, son of faithfulness. I want you to get that from this sermon, that it's actually dove, son of faithfulness, and that it's funny. And he says this, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me." But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down to it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. So God comes to Jonah, dove, son of faithfulness, and goes, go to Nineveh. And you need to understand what's going on here. Understand the cultural things that are happening. That when you hear the word Nineveh, immediately there should be a gut reaction that hits you. That is, you're just ooh, boo, boo,
boo, rubbish, filth, slime, muck, boo, boo.
How terrible it is. These people were awful. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria at the time, and they were terrible. They were the nemesis of evil, an awful power that was known when they were conquering you, they would scalp you alive as they conquered you. They would have been like a modern day Al-Qaeda or ISIS or a KKK that just brought terrorism to everywhere they go. You know, kind of a modern day Third Reich of the World War II, you know. Everybody hated them. They were everyone's enemy. They were awful. And most likely, most people had stories about people that were from Assyria or from Nineveh that had affected someone negatively in their life. And God calls Jonah, peace, son of faithfulness, right, to go proclaim to them. And what does God usually proclaim? It usually has something to do with life and mercy, right? Yeah. And Jonah says, no way, man, no way. And we actually end up finding out in chapter 4 that it's not because he's scared. That's not why he does it. But he doesn't want them to be shown the love of God. He doesn't want them to experience any manner of salvation. So he completely runs in the other direction. He is so selfish. He doesn't want anything good to happen to those nasty people in Nineveh, right? So he goes in the completely opposite direction. You can see in this map here that Nineveh is actually modern day Baghdad in Iraq, you know, all the way over on that one side. And he flees all the way to the other to Tarshish. And Tarshish is right by the Straits of Gibraltar. It's kind of like, it's the last stop on the train line. It'd be kind of like when we say, I'm going to go all the way to Timbuktu, right? Like it's saying, I'm going to go all the way to Tarshish, kind of the end of the known world. And we see here at the beginning of the story what Jonah is actually going through here. We see that he is asleep at the wheel, you could say, sleeping through what God would have him do. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? I think we do this a lot of times when it's kind of we zone out. We're almost like we're fall asleep while we're awake. I mean, I remember this has happened to me a bunch while I'm driving. You know, I'll be driving along. It used to happen to me a lot when I had like a longer commute. I used to commute a lot. But now my commute's shorter, but it still happens. Like I remember one really bad time when I was kind of zoned out and was kind of sleeping at the wheel, that I was just going down through the middle of Arkansas, and there's this big interchange where you get on one freeway to another one, and I just blew right past it. It was in the middle of nowhere. It took forever to turn around and come back to interchange. But it was, I was like, oh my goodness, how long was I zoned out like that? I didn't even see the road. I realized I had passed it once I saw the exits afterwards. Like, it was awful. And I just think about, what if someone had come into my lane or something like that? My zoning out could have been very, very dangerous for everyone that's involved. And this is what's going on with Jonah. Like we see that he comes to God, tells him to go do that, and he goes down to Joppa, and he gets on a boat, and he gets a boat, and they start selling out. And what's the first thing he does in the story? He goes into the bottom of the boat and he falls asleep. And we see as he's sleeping, he's not even realizing the havoc that he is causing to the people that are all around him. He doesn't realize the suffering that he's causing to those that are near him, because the Lord begins to make the sea churn and boil, and waves are coming up over it, and the sailors begin to be afraid, and they're like, oh no, what's going on here? And the sailors do what their sailors are going to do. They're polytheistic. That's the day and time that they're living in. They're polytheistic, and they're trying to figure out which God is the one that they upset and they need to reconcile with. So they begin praying to every God they know, trying to get the storm to settle down, and they can't get it settled down. Jonah is still asleep in the bottom of the boat, and he's not even realizing the havoc that he's causing these guys. And nothing happens to answer their prayers, and they begin to take their livelihood, the cargo of the ship, the reason why they're sailing to begin with, they start throwing that into the sea, trying to do everything they can to save their lives. And then the captain finally says, like, go wake up the guy that's sleeping in the bottom of the boat. And they wake Jonah up, and he has no clue of the pain and the havoc that he has caused all of these sailors. And frankly, he doesn't even care. He's just a guy sleeping in the bottom of a boat, trying to run away from anything that resembles responsibility or duty. And this all kind of reminds me of our own spiritual slumber, and I think we do struggle with that, with being in a spiritual sleepy state, kind of zoned out, and I'm just going down the highway, the spiritual highway of God, going down and just zoning out and just going through the motions, right? And it's so easy for us to do that and not realize the pain and the hurt that we may be causing others as we drive our spiritual car, as we go down through and just want to keep on getting on, right? Causing havoc all around us because we don't actually want to serve the people. We just want what we want. Don't wake me up. Don't make me see things through God's eyes. Like, don't make me do that. Like, I just want to keep on going. I'm happy with how it is. And when we say those things and believe those things and go to the bottoms of the boats and sleep like Jonah, we become like an emotional wrecking ball for all these people around us, causing havoc and hurt everywhere we go. And we're not even doing it on purpose. I don't think us that are in a spiritual slumber, I don't think we mean to hurt people. Generally we're good people. We're just, we don't have to do anything about it. And I think one of the things that comes from is that we all know that we're saved by grace, right? Like, I can go to God and I can get goodness and I can go to the good place upstairs at some point, right? Well, I think that idea of personal salvation is part of the issue. That we kind of forget that we are all in this together and that our sin doesn't just affect me and God, but my sin wreaks havoc on the other people around us. So when I believe things and do things, then it hurts those around us. And many times we'll kind of wake up for a second from this and we look around and we're like, no, I didn't cause any of this. I'm a Christian. I follow God. But we see in our spiritual slumbers that we are selfish and we ignore the needs of others, just trying to do whatever is right in our own eyes. It's like, I always liked church like this. Or I liked it when we sang those songs. I liked it when we did it this way more. I can't wait till after COVID when we can go back to normal. We're not going back to normal. Like, a sign of spiritual slumber is when we say, I'll flee from all of this if they change this in the church again. Or if this changes in my life, I'm going to be angry and run away and do all that. That's just all signs of spiritual slumber. And it's not just church things, but it's also just society stuff. It's all of these things that if they change or move around, we're going to get angry and we're just going to get upset at the people that vote different than us. And I'm going to vote for him just because it makes the other people mad. That's spiritual slumber. And it's the sign of Jonah inside of each of us. And at this point, Jonah is just a sleepwalking havoc machine, right? So the captain says, call on your God and tell him, pray to him in case he's angry. And the sailors end up casting lots, kind of rolling dice and gambling and all these things, trying to decide, who is guilty, who do they need to say, like, this is the God that's got the problem over there. And it turns out that it's Jonah. So they're like, Jonah, you need to pray to your God. And they ask him, like, who are you? He's like, come on, guys, we talked about this already, He goes, I'm a Hebrew, and I believe in the God who created both the land and the sea. And he goes, remember, I am fleeing from him right now. And they're like, The God who created the land and the sea is our problem right now. You're running from him? And they're like, ah, you can just imagine, it's almost like a comedy. You can just imagine like the color leaving their faces as they realize that they found like the evil ghost is in the ship with them, right? It's like, it's your fault, Jonah, it's your fault. And the thing is, Jonah doesn't even realize what he's doing. He doesn't realize that he's this emotional wrecking ball. And the sailors look at him and they're like, well, what do you want us to do? How do we get out of this situation? And Jonah says, throw me into the sea. Throw me into the churning, boiling waters. And at that point, we kind of stop in the story like, oh, Dove, son of faithfulness, finally gets it. He's actually being faithful. Look at him. He's repented and he's willing to sacrifice his life so that others, these sailors that nobody knows their names, so that they may live. Oh, what a beautiful story, right? No. We find out in chapter 4 of Jonah that that's nowhere near the case. Jonah would rather die than give forgiveness and love and grace and mercy to the people of Nineveh. You can almost hear him say, haven't you seen what they have done to me and my people? And you know that there's been calls for a side of his own heart that he'd rather see bombs fall out of the sky onto Nineveh and turn that entire area into glass. He's asleep and he's faithless. He just wants to go back to sleep and not even worry about the havoc that he's causing anybody else. He's just like, let me be asleep forever in the bottom of the ocean. So those sailors pick him up and throw him into the sea, and it becomes glassy smooth all around. And this is where this is one of the reasons why it's one of my favorites, is that those sailors, they begin to worship the one true God. And it says that they begin to make sacrifices to him. What's interesting is the sacrifices there, those aren't like, we're so removed from sacrifices, we don't know what it is. It's like, oh yeah, they're throwing a rock in the air or something. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. But those sacrifices are like, they're sacrificing like a cow to God. They're not doing that on that boat. Like, if they do that, they're going to sink because the whole boat's going to catch on fire and it's just going to be a whole thing, right? Like, they're doing that later. And that's the point, is that they realize that the one true God is the one true God, the creator of the heavens and the sea and the dry land and everything that creeps and moves on in it. And they begin to see him through this imperfect witness of Dove, son of faithfulness. God works and gets glory. And they start to follow after this one true God, not just in that moment, but it becomes a new thing for them in their lives. So does this mean that God uses imperfect, slumbering people? We'll get to that in a few weeks. So let's go back to Jonah again here. And are you ready for Jonah and the whale now? Because here it is, verse 17. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And if we were to end the story right here, it would be like a terrible tragedy, right? It's almost like a Greek tragedy. You know, he doesn't get it, he doesn't care, and he dies, even though he's created all this havoc, and the prophet is dead. It's a Greek tragedy, right? But how long does he stay in that whale or the fish? 3 days? That sounds familiar, right? And while he's in there, we end up seeing in the story that in that time, God is actually saving Jonah. And we see in that time, in those 3 days in the whale, that it wakes him from his spiritual slumber. And that's what we all want to do. I'm sure you're hearing this about spiritual slumber. You're like, all right, Pastor, like, tell us how to get out of the spiritual slumber. Give us the 3 easy steps or the 3 easy signs that we can get out of the spiritual slumber. And I don't know, Jesus kind of talks about this for a little bit, because in Matthew chapter 12, So some of the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the day and all that were coming up to Jesus. They're like, Jesus, if you are indeed the Messiah, then give us a sign. Show us how wonderful you are. Show us that you really mean business. Like, show us a sign. And Jesus says this in verse 39. No sign will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And they're thinking like, Jonah? What do you mean, Jonah? What sign of the prophet of Jonah? Jonah, that little book in the Testament, because it's not the Old Testament yet. Anyway, for just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And the men of Nineveh, listen to this, and the men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation, and the people in Nineveh will condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. So you who are spiritually sleeping, Jesus comes into our spiritually slumbering, unfaithful world and just breaks in. He's the creator of the sea and the land and everything that is in it. And he comes and he dies and is swallowed by that creation itself. And he is consumed by the evil that is all around us. He is consumed by the havoc that our slumbering has created. He is consumed by the bile in that whale's stomach. And then he emerges from the depths in the midst of the creation of the earth and says that death no longer has a hold on him, and that death no longer has a hold on you. And while I could tell you, here's 3 easy steps to getting out of your spiritual slumber: read more, pray more, serve more, it's all would be just a lie. A lie that would serve myself and make you feel better about what you're doing. Because we're like Jonah. We're asleep at the wheel, and what wakes us up is descending down into the fish and discovering our own mortality, our own death, and our own end. And finally, 3 days after, we, like Jonah, will get spat up on the other side of the cross, on the other side of resurrection, onto the dry ground, freshly dry from our baptism, experiencing the life of the Creator that is coursing through us with a new, enlivened, awake energy, saying, God, I give up. I'm done. Use me, Lord. And I think in that moment, we do wake. And when you've come to your end and you know that the Lord has you, He may just vomit you out onto the shore of a city that needs a messenger from God. And I think we'll end right there. Have a great week.